The lanterns are glowing in the mist tonight. The air is cool and calm, and somewhere beyond the hills, a faint wind stirs the treetops. Here, in this quiet corner of the world, there is nothing you need to do, no one waiting for answers, no clock to watch, just the steady hush of stillness gathering around you. So come in, step softly, and let the weight of the day climb gently from your shoulders. The fire is waiting. Let us sit for a while and begin. The Woman Who Swept the Sea Road, a Bellewood sleep story. There is a road outside Bellewood that most maps do not mark. It begins behind the crabapple grove, where the wind smells of iron and seaweed, and the gulls cry like old women mourning something they forgot they lost. The villagers call it the Sea Road. It is not a road by law or surveyor's map. It is a path of flattened dune grass and wind-smoothed sand, barely wide enough for a handcart or a fisherman's stride. No one maintains it. No signs point the way, but still, it remains. At the very end of the sea road, just before the bluffs give way to water, there stands a cottage. It is small, whitewashed, and weather-worn, with shutters that rattle in the wind, and a chimney that leans just enough to give it character. And every morning, a woman sweeps that road. Her name is Eliza Moore. She is not mad. She is not lonely in the tragic way that makes neighbors whisper. She is simply steadfast. She wakes before dawn, before the gulls begin their circling, and she takes her broom, an old thing with a worn birch handle and hand-tied bristles, and sweeps from her cottage to the edge of the bluffs and back again. She does not hurry. She never has. Her movements are slow, deliberate, like someone writing a letter in a language that no longer has a country. 21 years she has done this, and though Bellewood is a town that minds its own business, people talk. Waiting for her son, one dock worker mutters. To keep her mind from slipping, says another. She just likes a tidy path, an older woman insists, adjusting her shawl. But none of them know. Only Eliza does. It was a June morning, long ago, when her son Jonah came out to sea. He was 17. The sky was sullen that day, gray at that particular shade that fishermen call morning glass. She had made him a soft bread roll with honey. He had kissed her cheek, and he had said something that echoed in her bones for years afterward. "Don't wait up. I'll be back by supper." He was not. Not that day, not the next, not when her husband fell ill 2 winters later and passed away quietly beneath the wool blanket Jonah had once used as a child. There was no body, no confirmation, only a boat found cracked against the shoals, half filled with rainwater, and a single glove tucked beneath the seat. And so Eliza swept. The first year, it was desperation. She swept with urgency, sometimes twice a day. She wrote letters to the harbor masters, asked every sailor she saw if they ever had heard of a boy with stormy eyes and a quick laugh. The second year, it was hope. She hung lanterns outside the door, left the porch light burning even on wind-cracked nights, kept a journal of weather patterns as if that might reveal a reason. By the 5th year, it had become something else, a ritual, a rhythm, a pact between herself and the sea, a way to say, "I remember, I remain." People stopped asking. Children grew up never having known Jonah, but understood not to walk the sea road before dawn. It belonged to Eliza. She never remarried, never left Bellewood. In fact, she hardly left her stretch of the shoreline. Everything she needed, she grew or bartered. She had her tea, her broom, her late husband's fishing knife, polished to a dull silver crescent, and the sea. Always the sea. Some days it gave her nothing. Others, it gifted her things. A sea-worn button. A leather in a bottle, smudged and unreadable. A carved bit of wood with a name she couldn't pronounce. She placed them on her mantle, like offerings from a god that didn't speak, but sometimes still remembered her. And then one morning, something changed. The wind came from the south. That had not happened in years. Eliza opened her door and breathed in. The air smelled wrong, or perhaps just unfamiliar. There was no threat to it, only promising or warning. She picked up her broom, walked to the start of the sea road, and stopped. There were footprints, large, bare, fresh. They led inland, away from the bluff. And Eliza, who had swept that road every day for 21 years, knew with absolute certainty these were not her own. She did not panic. She did not run. Eliza Moore simply stood there, one hand tightening on the broom's handle, the other slack by her side. The wind tugged gently at her shawl. She looked down at the prints again, each one crisp, distinct, as if someone had walked the path only moments before. The tide was low, that much she could tell from the smell, the briny, ripe scent of kelp and shell and rock. Footprints like these did not last long, not in Bellewood, not here, where the sea liked to smooth things away. She stepped forward, one foot, then the other. She followed the prints, her broom trailing slightly behind her like a tail. The path narrowed as it passed the crabapple grove. She glanced at the branches, remembering Jonah as a child, climbing those very trees to steal blossoms for his pockets. The breeze grew stronger. There was a hush to it, like breath held just behind the sky. She followed the trail past the garden, past the old fence, where white paint had long since peeled into lace, past the traps her husband once stacked like prayers on the side of the shed. And there, just beyond the tool bench, there he stood. She did not cry, not yet. He was older now. Of course he was. Broad shoulders turned slightly inward, beard streaked with salt and ash, skin browned from suns she hadn't seen. There was a limp in his left step. But it was Jonah, her son. The boy she remembered, the man she didn't know yet. He turned to face her. "Hello, Ma," he said. That was all. She did not need more. She crossed the yard, slowly. No broom now, no words. And when she reached him, she placed a single hand on his cheek. His skin was warm, still real, still hers. And just like that, the road no longer needed sweeping. That night, Eliza made tea, strong, black, sweet in the old iron pot that had belonged to her mother. Jonah sat across from her, hunched slightly, as if unsure where to place his elbows. The chair creaked beneath his frame. They didn't speak at first. There was no need. The silence between them was thick with all the years neither of them had known how to bridge. Eliza poured 2 cups. She did not ask where he had been. Not yet. Instead, she pushed a plate of bread across the table, sliced from the loaf she always made on Saturdays. He took a piece, ate slowly. Finally, his voice came, low and graveled, like the road beyond the porch. "I went to Java." It wasn't a story, not exactly. It was a series of fragments, a schooner grounded in Madagascar, a fever that took half the crew, work on a sugar plantation, then a tea ship bound for Bristol. He had changed his name, cut his hair, let time pass. There was no good way to come back, he said, so I kept going. Eliza nodded, not in forgiveness, not yet, but in recognition. They talked until the kettle cooled and the fire dipped low. And when Jonah finally stood and made his way to the room that had been his father's, Eliza remained at the table, hands curled around the empty cup. She did not sleep. Instead, she sat by the hearth, broom resting beside her like an old friend, unsure of what to do next. Her fingers traced the handle absently, remembering the feel of it in the storm, in fog, in grief. She was not ready to put it away. But she was no longer sure she needed it. That was the start of the quiet shift. And the weeks that followed, Jonah stayed. He fixed the cottage roof, replaced the gate latch, planted squash behind the shed. He did not say much, but he stayed. Eliza adjusted. Her days stretched out differently now, still filled with rhythm, but without urgency. Some mornings she walked the sea road out of habit. She'd carry the broom but barely used it. Instead, she'd pause at the bluff, eyes on the horizon, whispering things she no longer needed answers to. Bellewood noticed the change. A few neighbors began to nod more warmly. Someone brought over a fresh jar of pear preserves. One girl from the schoolhouse left a sprig of rosemary on Eliza's windowsill. And quietly, word passed through town. Jonah Moore is home. On the anniversary of his disappearance, 22 years since that June storm, Eliza and Jonah walked the sea road together. No broom, no baskets, just mother and son, their feet pressing into the familiar sand. At the bluff's edge, Jonah bent to pick up a small stone. He turned it over in his hand. Then, with a glance at his mother, he placed it gently beside the row of others on her windowsill, a row she had begun when she thought he would never return. And that night, Eliza slept. Not the half-rest of those long, lonely years, but truly. No broom by the door, no lantern left burning, just a hearth gone cold, and a woman at peace. Eliza began to find herself humming again. Not the songs of her youth, those had scattered like dry leaves, but little murmurs of rhythm, a tune without melody, woven into the washing of dishes, the folding of linen, the brushing of crumbs into her palm. Some mornings, Jonah would wake late and find her outside the cottage, standing at the edge of the bluff with her shawl wrapped around her shoulders like armor against the past. She wouldn't speak. She didn't need to. He would walk up beside her, sometimes hand her a peeled apple, and they would eat in silence. They began repairing things. The garden fence, once bowed and leaning, stood straight again. The windows, which had shuttered all winter long, now sealed tight. And the front step, where Jonah had once tripped as a boy, chasing after a storm lantern, was finely mended with a stone slab, smooth as river glass. Evenings passed like drifting fog, soft, slow, barely there, and then gone. One night, Eliza told Jonah a story about the first time she had felt him kick in her belly, about how his father had insisted it was just indigestion, and how she had laughed so hard she spilled the blackberries down her dress. He listened, face tilted toward the firelight. He didn't interrupt. "I never told you that," she said. "I'm glad you did," he replied. Days lengthened. Spring shifted to summer. The air turned gold and sleepy. Eliza no longer marked time by sweeping. She marked it by things returned. Jonah's boots by the door. A cup and saucer, rinsed and drying. 2 spoons in a sugar jar. And sometimes she marked it by dreams. In her sleep, she would walk the sea road again. Only now, she was not alone. There were others. Women mostly. Some she knew, some she didn't. Some wore aprons and carried baskets. Some held letters. One held only a single candle. They never spoke. They simply walked beside her. She never feared the dreams. She woke gently from them, rested, whole. Jonah had started carving again. Small things, a spoon, a fish, a curved comb for Eliza's hair, though she rarely wore anything but her braid. She asked him once, "Why wood?" And he answered, "Because it remembers pressure, just like we do." In town, people began to speak of Eliza differently, not with pity, but with softness. The seamstress sent over a bolt of navy wool for no reason at all. A young boy dropped off a sketched map of the sea road in case anyone gets lost again. Bellewood was not a town of grand gestures, but it was a place that understood the language of small kindnesses. Jonah grew quieter with each week, not withdrawn, but full, like a man saving his words for something better. Eliza let him be. She had learned not all silence meant sorrow. She swept the porch one evening, not the sea road, just the steps. The breeze was cool. The stars were beginning to gather. Jonah came to stand beside her. "I'm thinking of going inland," he said. She didn't look up, just nodded slowly. "Not far, just for a while. See the hills. Hear something besides gulls." She laid the broom down. "Then go. Roads were made for walking, just not always in a straight line." They sat on the porch until long after the lanterns burned low. And when Jonah left 2 days later, he did not go at dawn. He waited until midday. And he did not leave without a promise. "I'll be back before the apples fall." After Jonah left, the cottage did not feel empty. It paused, like the breath between verses. Eliza did not rush to fill the space he left. She didn't rearrange his things, nor wash the cup he used the morning he left. Instead, she let everything rest, as if the cottage itself were adjusting to a slower rhythm. She took to walking in the mornings again, not with her broom, and not always the full sea road, but far enough to feel the salt wind tug gently at her shawl. The sea had always spoken to her in small ways: foam patterns, driftwood shapes, the call of gulls that dipped low before a storm. But now it whispered differently, not with urgency, but with something like approval. She often stood near the crabapple grove, fingers trailing across the lowest branch, remembering Jonah as a boy who had once tried to build a treehouse too small for even his boots. She smiled at the thought. Then she turned back toward the cottage, kettle on her mind. The letter she'd tucked away in her sewing drawer stayed untouched. But she began writing more. Not to anyone in particular, just small notes, folded once and slid into the book she kept by her bedside. "Today, I let the wind blow my list away and didn't chase it. Jonah's spoon still smells faintly of cedar. I slept without dreams and woke before the sun. No broom, just breath." The village moved at its usual pace. Children chased chickens. The preacher's wife ordered a new bonnet from Boston. The postmistress grew sweet peas in an old basin. But here and there, Eliza noticed shifts. The blacksmith nodded to her now, not just out of courtesy, but familiarity. A new widow 2 cottages down asked if Eliza might like to walk together one morning. And the innkeeper, new, young, a woman from up country, brought Eliza a jar of raspberry preserves and said, "For the one who knows the road." Summer softened, then it curled inward. Then came the first leaf. Eliza noticed it on the sill one morning, golden, dry, heart-shaped. She placed it in her apron pocket and said aloud, "Almost." One week later, a letter arrived. Not a grand one, no wax seal, no flourish, just a line, handwritten in a square and tidy script. I'll reach the bluff by sundown. Eliza set about making stew. She swept the porch, not because it needed it, but because it helped her breathe. She opened the windows. She lit a small candle by the old photograph. And when the wind shifted, it came not from the sea, but from the south, warm and familiar and full. She smiled. Eliza did not go to the bluff. She stayed in the kitchen, her hands in the dough bowl, folding in nutmeg and dried pear. She didn't need to watch for Jonah's return. She had already decided he was home again the moment the kettle felt full. He came just as the crust browned in the oven, the scent of clove curling through the windows. He didn't speak much. She didn't ask. For days, they did small things. They trimmed the hedge. They tied a string of dried orange slices along the mantel. They let the garden go to seed together. Not everything needed tending. Some things just needed to rest. When the frost came, they didn't light the fire right away. They waited until morning. They lit it together, both kneeling like pilgrims. Eliza said, "This is how we keep going, not with grand gestures, but warm hands and mornings like this." Jonah nodded. Winter in Bellewood was never harsh. It was a season of hush, of thick socks, of stories half told. Jonah took to carving in the evenings. Now, not just spoons, but birds. Eliza lined them up on the windowsill. One for every year she waited. One for every season she now had. On the night before solstice, they went out to the bluff, just the two of them. Eliza brought a lantern. Jonah brought a folded piece of paper. He read a poem that she had once stitched onto a handkerchief. He'd memorized it as a child. He spoke it aloud, his voice low and sure. The sea may steal, the wind may take, but love is patient in its ache. They stood there until the stars brightened, not speaking, just being. And in the stillness that followed, it was clear. Eliza would never need the broom again, not because the path no longer needed sweeping, but because it had led exactly where it was meant to. "Sleep well," she would whisper, to the hearth now, and to the village, and to herself. Because some stories don't end, they just go quiet for a while.